And now we can start the show. Shortbox Nation, without further ado, let's talk Silverhawks. Let's talk about writing. Let's talk about comics. Let's give it up for the one and only Ed Brisson. Hey, Ed, how are you doing? Welcome
Hey,
to the show.
wow, listen to those people. So much excitement.
Dude, I have been humming the theme song all day. Wings of silver, nerves of steel, silver hawks. I almost called my dad to see if he still had like any of the VHSs because he was a huge Silverhawks fan.
Nice. That's great. Yeah, the same here. Growing up, I was a big fan of the show. It was on during that like kind of killer block of cartoons that came on after getting home from school. You could kind of sit down
Yeah.
from about 4 o'clock till 5:30, 6 o'clock, and just pound back some like incredible like GI Joe, Transformers,
Yeah.
uh, Thundercats, and SilverHawks. It was a pretty great time.
What I did not know, coming across this on my research was that it was like meant to be the companion show to Thundercats, which I
Yeah,
guess, it's in the name, Thundercats, Silverhawks, the whole animal motif.
yeah, it was kind of silver. It was kind of like a sister show almost. Like there was never any sort of crossover, and it was never really implied that they were in the same universe. But it was the
Hmm.
same production studio that I think was just trying to capitalize on the success of Thundercats by doing Silverhawks, and then actually they did another show afterwards called Tiger Sharks as well.
Yeah, Tiger Sharks. Yeah, come on. Yeah, you're bringing me back. I will say though, I think I liked out of the three we just named. I think Silverhawks was more of my jam because I just liked the animation a lot. It was just a lot more. Like, I don't know. It was like really slick. Thundercats was like more of my dad's thing, but like Silverhawks, they had the badass masks and they were in space. And I mean, come on, like Bluegrass is one of the most badass, cartoon characters ever. Like he had the
Yeah.
bandana, the cowboy hat. He was in blue. He could, play a wicked solo.
No, yeah, I agree. I loved Silverhawks. I think I had more of the Silverhawks toys than I did of anything else. Um, yeah, I thought it was always just like such a really cool premise of this sort of like these space cops versus these space mobsters, and
Yeah.
even as a kid, I was a big crime fan. So
Yeah.
like mixing crime and sci-fi like that was very much my peanut butter and chocolate as a kid.
Well said. And something about Monstar. I was looking through some of like the character designs again. I forgot that he transforms. I guess what
He
is it
does, yeah.
when he gets hit by the light from the other moon and he ends up transforming.
He transforms into like it's not a werewolf, but almost like he becomes this crazy sort of robot version of himself, much deadlier.
Now
That's
that,
something in the comic that we're kind of holding on to. We're not getting
yeah,
into it right away. We're gonna build and let audiences sort of anticipate that moment
you
because he's still badass enough, like without transforming.
without transforming
Uh,
to a werewolf, but I mean, he would be extra badass if he transformed to
yeah,
a werewolf
absolutely,
in an
absolutely.
armor. Like, come on. Now,
But
now
you don't want to overdo it, right? You want to save those moments. You
yeah,
want to savor it.
absolutely.
You want to make it count.
Yeah, that's like a issue 5 moment right there,
I
like to
think so. Yeah.
wrap up the first story arc. Ed, you brought up the toys growing up, and have you had a chance to look at the new? I don't know how new, but I mean they're pretty new. But like Super 7 has been
Yes.
re-releasing everything from the 80s, and
I have
absolutely. Oh, you got some.
right here. I have
Oh,
Hot
whoa,
Wing here. So I do. Yes, I've been
nice.
following them, but I do a thing I do to try and curb my own uh, collecting tendencies is I'll only buy them if I can find them in a store. Like
Dude,
I won't I
yes,
won't order them in.
it's too easy. It's too easy if it's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like on demand
They're,
Amazon.
they're not cheap.
No, they're
I
not.
don't know what they are in American, but like Canadian, I think that one was like $90 or $100 for the figure. So like
Woo!
that thing could break me real quick.
Oh yeah, see, and Super 7 has not been playing around. I mean, as far as like the articulation, the box art is always something to just behold in person. But that is funny you bring that up about your rule of only buying in person. That is one of my New Year's resolutions for like my collecting habits. Is I'm trying to like scale back
Right.
everything I buy because I just literally just do not have enough space. So I'm trying to be a little more selective, a little more, I want to support my local comic shop as best as I can. And we're recording this, on January 14th. The episode will come out the week before Silverhawks issue 1 comes out. So I feel appropriate in asking this before it gets a little mundane and whatnot. But how is the new year treating you so far? And I
Um,
ask that generally, like, how are you
yeah,
doing? How's 2025 going so far?
I had no complaints really. Like, it's been pretty chill. Unfortunately, it's obviously not been the same for a lot of people. Um, but yeah, this, it's I got no complaints. It feels just like more of the same,
Yeah,
which is fine. It was just this past weekend, my wife and I, it was our anniversary, so we went away, and so I got away out of town for a few days where we
nice,
stayed in a little cabin that was in it was a farm sanctuary, so there was a
hmm,
bunch of like goats and other animals around, and like we could hike through the trails there. So it was nice to kind of just go away and disconnect for a few days,
nice.
which we, obviously our anniversary is early in the new year, so we tend to try and do that every year.
That sounds lovely, Ed. It sounds way better than what I've been doing the last like 2 weeks. Aside from having just like a busy holiday, being family, and then my wife's birthday is January 6th as well, so it was like a lot of celebration. I also got extremely sick, like at the top of the new year. I got a fever, and then I've got this like upper respiratory thing. I've got this cough that won't go away. So like my I like that. And you normally like to start off the new year like on the right foot, like organize. I'll donate like a bunch of stuff and just try to like start the new year off like lean and kind of figuring out like what my schedule's looking like. Like all of that has just gone out the window being sick. Like me and my
Right.
couch have become very intimate these last couple of weeks. And I'm finally feeling better. And like I was telling you, this is my first podcast anything of the new year. And I feel like I feel behind, but at the same time, I'm trying to give myself grace to, hey, you weren't feeling good, buddy. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
maybe this is the
Take,
reminder to put health first.
take the time, and I had to go through the same. While the New Year's has been fine so far, the end of the year was just atrociously bad. Like one thing after the other for me. I slipped down our back steps. It was icy, and
Oof.
I was running after my dog who was being an asshole, and I was trying to stop him, and I just like cartoon wise, like my feet just went out, and my back came. I landed on the steps, and then I got sick.
Ouch.
Same thing, right afterwards, and then on the day before New Year's, I dropped a giant piece of wood onto my big toe, and
Oof.
so yeah, that I was like, I ended the year on the down note. So like anything beyond that is just is an improvement.
I feel you. Yeah, you got to take care of yourselves. Now, Ed, are you someone that takes like New Year's resolutions like seriously, like from like a comic, from a professional perspective? Like, do you get, I guess, whatever, reminiscent about like the past year? Do you look at everything you've done? Do you plan like goals for the next year? And are you someone that like you've got your convention schedule figured out? You got your projects all lined up? Or are you someone that like kind of just eases into the new year?
I kind of just ease into it. I don't tend to like when I take tend to make sort of resolutions. It's not a New Year's thing. Like if I am resolved to do something, I'm doing it then.
Hmm.
Years and years and years ago, as part of my old job, I remember we had to take a time management course. It was not me specific. Everyone in our work environment had to take it. And one of the things that I took, there's a bunch of stuff that I took from it that I think was really helpful in my day to day life. But one of the things that he talked about was resolutions and this idea of putting stuff off to like start at a certain day, like
Hmm.
starting at um, end of a month or the beginning of the year. And I tend to like it. He was like, just screw that. Like if you're gonna do something,
Just
do
do
it.
it. Yeah.
Just do it and jump into it, and you can resolve to sort of make a resolution to keep with this for X amount of time. And I tend to do that more than saying on January 1st,
Hmm.
I'm going to start doing this or that. And then I say that, and then I did create a whole new rotating cleaning schedule for the house at the beginning of the year. But that was more like I warned my family that it was coming more than it was a resolution. Like,
Cleaning is coming.
yeah, January 1st, this is a brand new cleaning schedule for how we're going to handle it. And it actually, weirdly, has been so far 2 weeks in a very beneficial thing. And I like breaking things down into bite-sized
Yeah.
chunks, and that's very much what this is.
It's the way to do it. And so, coming into 2025, obviously we're gonna, mentioned Silverhawks, and we'll talk more about that Silverhawks. But what else is on your plate, comic book wise? Like, what else are you writing? What other projects do you currently have
So
going on?
right now, uh, by the time people hear this, it will have been out for a week already. But I wrote a creep show
Oh, nice.
story that's in the creep show number 5 through Skybound, which is the third volume of creep show. I apologize. I don't know if you can hear my dog is scratching underneath my table here. Um, I have Silverhawks, obviously, that comes out in a couple of weeks here. I've got Thundercats Lost, which is a
Nice.
spin-off Thundercats book that I'm doing at Dynamite. That's an ongoing series. I have 4 other books that will be coming out at some point over the course of the year. Um, they're all of them, I think, are like 5 issue
Miniseries.
minis
Hmm.
miniseries. One of them is an OGN, like a straight to graphic novel, but it's the same length as a 5 issue mini. None of those have been announced yet, though.
Okay.
One of them is completely done. It's written. It's I think we're just in the final pass of lettering and colors on it. I don't know when it gets announced. One of them's about 80% done, and then the other two, I think one's I don't know, one we're about halfway through, and the other one I'm just about to start. So I haven't even started on it yet. So, but because they're not announced, I can't really say too much about them.
No, that's fair.
But yeah, those are kind of in the works. I've slowed down a bit on comics over the last year because I've also been working in video games, which has been taking up the majority of my time. I'm on that full time, so
Wow. Okay.
I'm writing comics, early in the morning, and then after I finish my shift, and then in the middle there, 9 to 5, I'm writing video games.
Sorry. I just wrapped up playing Red Dead Redemption
Yeah,
2. And are you well, I guess my first question to you is, are you a video gamer?
yeah. So
Oh,
I,
hell
I
yeah.
was a lapsed video game player. Like I played a lot when I was younger, and then I was lapsed for years. And then when the pandemic started, uh, everything was like pencils down, and I
Yeah,
had
yeah.
work coming in, and so I think I went nuts, and I just sat down and for like 8 or 9 months was like just playing video games like 10 hours a day. Like periodically I would have things come in, but it was a real sort
Yeah.
of lean time comic book wise, and I was just blasting through so many video games. And yeah, Red Dead Redemption 2 is right up there with
Dude.
one of
Yeah.
my all timers.
Okay, so similar story here. I grew up playing a crap ton of video games, and then obviously I kind of fell off as I got to college and just life and work and all this and that. But I found, like, during the lockdowns, I had plenty of time. I couldn't go anywhere, so I picked back. I got really back into video games, and it started with Shadow of the Colossus because it was like the free PlayStation Network game of the
Right.
month at that time. And I mean, just an amazing game. An older game, obviously, but it was like brand new to me, and just I attribute to that game the respark, and getting back into video games. So ever since then, I ever since then I typically have a game that I'm going through. And I'm not someone that can play, like, Fortnite or multiplayer games or online games. So I prefer to like one that has got a good story, a good action mode or story mode. And like I said, I just wrapped up Red Dead Redemption, and I'm in that weird limbo of trying to look for like the next thing I'm gonna play. I
Hmm.
try my best not to like actively seek things out. I kind of like let things kind of find me, or I'll go off recommendations and things like that. But yeah, Red Dead Redemption is just it just the bar has been just set so high because the story mode was amazing, and just the all the different things you could do. I got really into hunting and fishing. Like, I'm just past the time just like hunting and fishing. So I'm like, okay, I'm waiting for the next game to come find me and speak to me. Can you talk a little bit about the video games that you're working on, or and if not, if the projects are a secret, I guess could you talk about the difference in discipline between like writing a comic and working in video games? Is there a lot of like overlap? Do you find like some of the skills that you've picked up throughout the years writing comic books, it comes in handy with like, writing video games and scripts?
Yeah, so yeah, I can't unfortunately talk about the game because I'm NDA'd up the wazoo, and I would be murdered if I mention it. But yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of crossover. It's a lot different in terms of like doing sort of branching writing because it's almost like a choose your own adventure. You have
Hmm,
to uh, at times. Um, it's interesting because I feel like writing comic books really prepared me for writing video games, and it kind of actually freaked me out when I started writing video games at the start because comic books is very much like everything was due yesterday,
hmm,
and you get one or two passes, at a script or an outline, and then we have to keep the train moving. We got to keep going. Whereas video games, there's a lot more time spent developing and really world building. And this is I'm still fairly new to it. I'm a year into
okay.
working in video games, so my experience may not be the same as someone who's been at it for longer, or someone on a different game. But my experience so far is that there's a lot more time spent really developing. There's a lot more time. Like I spend a lot more time researching in video games versus what I can do in comics
Hmm,
because I have to move so much faster for comics. Um, and that because the deadlines are so much tighter in comics, I think I'm trained to move faster. Whereas like uh, when I started in video games, it's almost like I had to stop and slow down a little bit and
wow.
take my time and I appreciate that. It's great that you can sort of spend more time developing because obviously there's a lot more money there. It's a longer development process. Like games take several years
Mhm.
from conception till the time that they hit the shelf. Um, so yeah, I don't. There's a lot of similarities for sure, but it's like I feel like I'm claiming that it's a casual pace. There's a much slower pace, and that's not necessarily the the truth. Like it can move pretty quickly, um, but there's just so much more to research and so much more to build upon that it's I find that we're constantly revising, constantly revisiting, and going back, which is a great thing where we don't have the opportunity to do that on
Yeah.
comics. I can't go back and rewrite issue one
Hmm.
when I'm writing issue five. You know what I
I
mean?
see what you
Whereas
mean, yeah.
with games, like because it's almost like this organic, constantly developing thing, we can go back and change something that happens early in the game, and often will to suit something that's going to happen later.
And I'm
Uh,
and I imagine in video games, you're also working with, like, because of the size of the team, like, I imagine there's a lot more opportunities for revisions and I guess maybe, like, getting, like, a second opinion or,
yeah, and there's a lot of back and forth, and
got it.
it's not like I'm driving
Mhm.
story, and it's like just me and the artist, on a me artist and editor, I guess, on a book, where it's like three of us kind of just batting things back and forth. It's a much larger um, group of people that you kind of have to satisfy and make sure that everyone's needs are being met, and we're kind of all on the same page.
Got it. I guess growing up, did you want has this always been kind of like the goal growing up, whether that be, like, writing comics or video games? Like, was that did you always want to be a writer?
I want to be an artist. I want to be a comic book artist
Hmm,
growing up, and I originally only started writing comics because I needed something to draw.
hmm.
It was pre-internet when I started um, drawing my own stuff for like very early days internet. So it's not internet like we this. It's not like anything like we're doing now. And so there wasn't forums and stuff where you could go and team up with a writer. I ran into one writer that through a local comic shop, and he and I did not sort of see eye to eye. It was like very much he was like one of these writers who's sees himself as the almost like the soul storyteller, and
Yeah.
the artist is just there to realize his greatness, for the
Hmm.
world. Um, and I didn't like it. I didn't like his writing, but the attitude was the thing that kind of really threw me off. Um, because the thing that I like about comics is that it is a collaborative storytelling. You're getting both people get their fingerprints all over the product. Um, so I started writing just because that was the only time I'd run into a writer, and I just didn't think it would work. And I would rather just be in a in a closet drawing by myself and writing stories. And I started writing just so I could have stuff to draw. And I just kind of kept pushing myself forward, and I would self-publish mini comics. I spent way too much money when I was like 18 publishing a comic that I thought was going to be the thing to make me into a superstar. I
Hmm.
absolutely did not. But I wrote, I drew, I lettered, and I colored all my own stuff for about 15 years,
Wow.
self-publishing it, putting stuff online, etc. And then at a certain point, I realized that I liked the writing more than I liked doing the art. My brain was working faster than I could draw, and so I had these stories that I just wanted to get out, and I couldn't keep up with it. And my art style is fairly cartoony; it's more like an indie sort of like Fantagraphics or drawn in quarterly style art
Yeah.
that doesn't really suit a lot of the stories that I wanted to tell. Um, and also, like, I just going back to the collaborative thing is like at a certain point, I wanted to work with other people. I just didn't want to be by myself cranking the stuff out. And so I stopped drawing. I started just focusing on the writing, and through having self-published and been part of like the Vancouver comics community for a long time, I knew people who were artists there, and so I would, approach a couple of them and was like, "Hey, I want to start doing this sort of stuff. Are you interested in drawing a short story?" And I would do these like 5 to 10 page stories. They're all crime stories under the banner Murder Book. Um, and I did those for a few years. I think almost like 200 pages worth of content. And then I started to get some attention from publishers. I had an image book in like 2012, another in 2013, 2014. I think one every year for a good 6 years. And then I got hired by Marvel, DC, etc. And just sort of now I have a career where I'm a writer. The video game thing was never anything that occurred to me when I was younger. Um, where I could understand that there were people who like wrote and drew comics when I was younger. I couldn't wrap my mind around that with video games. It felt like they felt otherworldly, like they were
Hmm.
just from somewhere else. It was like trying to go work for Hollywood or something like that. Um, so that is something that over the last like half decade or so that we've really started to pay attention to, and been trying to sort of dip my toe into. Like as a writer, I love writing comic books, um, but I also want to kind of try other things. I want to try writing video games for a bit, and
Yeah.
I've written some short films that were quite enjoyable to do as well. So I like to spread around, but still in that vein where I'm like collaborating with others. I don't really have a lot of interest in writing short fiction or novels or anything like that. Again, I
Yeah.
like working with other people.
And I mean, it's been interesting, just from a fan and a reader perspective to watch a lot of like comic writers specifically that I grew up with, especially like during like that image renaissance period around like 2012 and all that. A lot of those writers start dipping their toes in other mediums, whether that be like TV or video games, or movies, and I guess at first, it's a little jarring because just even as a fan, and I guess personally speaking, maybe I was a little closed minded. Like, oh no, wait, they're comic writers, but it's like, well, I mean, their skill is being able to weave a story. So, I mean, why should it matter what the medium is? Their talent is still like the ability to tell a story and develop characters and things like that. Yeah, it makes sense they can maybe bounce around the mediums. So that's cool to hear that like you're exercising your muscle in these different mediums and finding joy in them and whatnot. um I guess I should take a step back and ask because you brought up before we hit record that you grew up in Toronto. You just mentioned that you're part of the you also lived in Vancouver. You were part of like that emerging and underground comic book scene. And I've always wanted to ask, what is in the water in Canada that has just given us so many talented comic creators? I was looking at a list of like Canadian comic book creators, and obviously, some that immediately come to mind is your Todd McFarlane's, your John Burns. But I mean, the list really does go on. I mean, you've got Dave Sim is from Canada, Fiona Staples, Hal Foster, and so on and so on. I guess thinking back to growing up and whatever that be Toronto or Vancouver, like what was the comic book scene like growing up? Did that seem like a viable? I guess the comics seem like a viable career. I know for a lot of like just comic book creators, like early on, it was maybe not the most viable thing. It wasn't like the most immediate thing that a lot of creator or emerging creators thought of, but especially in Canada, I guess what was the comic book scene and culture like in Canada?
So where so I grew up mostly in Oshawa, which is I was born in Toronto but grew up just outside. And really when I was growing up, I was the only one of my friends who read comic books. So
Hmm.
like I didn't have a whole other people that I was talking about comics with or anything like that. And I moved to Kelowna, BC, which is um inland BC when I was 14. Lived there for a few years, and it wasn't until I moved to Vancouver that I started to. And part of why I moved to Vancouver, just real quickly, is I really wanted to get in comics. I wanted to be a comic book artist in Kelowna. If you look back at my yearbook, it says that I'm going to be a comic book artist.
Awesome.
I told anyone who would listen that I would be a comic book artist, but it was one of those things where it felt like I was pretty confident in myself, and I had no reason to be because my art was terrible. I was pretty confident, but I also didn't know what the real path was, other than like I was sending in packets to Marvel and to DC, and not really kind of getting any response. But when I moved to Vancouver, part of why I moved there is I'd heard that there was this sort of comics community. And in Kelowna, towards the end, it was me and a couple friends who were like wanted to be comic book creators, and but there was Vancouver was a big city to us, and there were these group of comic, kind of more like indie underground
Hmm.
comic book creators, and I'd heard that they, you'd have these monthly get-togethers and they would hang out. And I think as soon as I moved there, those monthly get-togethers stopped and they weren't happening. But like slowly, I lived there for about 2 or 3 years before I really started to actually start meeting people who were in the comic scene. And actually, weirdly, just coincidentally, I worked at a bookstore, and I didn't realize that one of my coworkers was one of the people who was part of that comic scene, because we just kind of knew each other on a first name basis. And it was I can't remember. I found out her last name. I was like, oh, you know, I know who you are. Like you're part of the comic scene here. And through her, I ended up meeting some other folks there. And I think like I had a few friends who are also like one of my friends from Kelowna kind of moved up with me, and we were doing comic books, self publishing stuff. But it was like kind of like a really indie, more cartoony sort of scene.
Hmm.
Um, and then in 2004, I started the Vancouver Comic Jam, which is like a monthly meetup for comic book artists, writers, whatever, where you could come, and we would do comic jams where like one person draws a panel, they pass it
Yeah.
down. It was at a bar, so people could have a couple drinks and sort of like be social. And through that, some people started coming out. Then started meeting more people, which is great. The comic jam, even though I'm not there, is still going. It's on its 21st year, which
Oh
is
wow.
great. But
Cool.
yeah, so I started meeting more people, and I remember I met Steve Rolston, who did he drew Queen and Country, the Greg Rucka
Yeah. Yeah.
book.
Hmm.
He did oh god, I'm blanking on the name of One Bad Day, I think, which is a Brian Wood book. And he was the first guy I met who was like a guy who was working in comics, and it was very exciting to me. But it actually made this abstract thing kind of feel more real when I met
Mm.
him, and I started to really sort of double down my efforts in terms of like putting together my own stuff and just getting my work out there. And through that period, I had met like Simon Roy, who drew my first murder book story. I met Johnny Christmas, who did a murder book story. We did two murder book stories together, and then we did a series called Sheltered. So I started to meet some people who were trying to get into the industry. I think there was this a really great period around 2010 to 2015, 16 in Vancouver, where there was a lot of comic book creators
Hmm.
around, who had moved to Vancouver, and we were all kind of feeding off of each other, like just like the energy that was there, and we ended up all like so many of us ended up getting into comics, just but I think all independently. Like it wasn't like we got in through someone else. It was just like independently or working together, we got into comics. Um, and it was a great period of time. But then I left Vancouver in 2016, and I think at this point most of the people have left Vancouver. Vancouver is a very I complain about this a lot. I did an entire book about it, but it's a very expensive, very hard city to survive in if you don't have a
Wow.
lot of money. And unfortunately, that seems to have. There is still a comic community there. There's still some really great people, but it's not sort of as large and vibrant as it was maybe about a decade ago.
Hmm. Ed, I've been dying to ask this since you mentioned that you started as an artist. For our video listeners, video viewers, sorry. You've got a lot of original, what looks like original comic art
I
behind
do,
you.
yeah.
It looks like you're in your studio. You got your shelf to your right, and then original comic art behind you. What's some of the pieces behind you? Like, who do you got
So
hung up on the wall?
all of this stuff is from books I've written. It's like another way, like we were talking about earlier, for me to curb my collecting tendencies.
Hmm.
That I'll only pick up art from books I've written.
Smart.
So like this is the cover from There's Something Wrong with Patrick Todd #4, I believe. So it's a Gavin Guidry. This one right here, that's from Ghost Rider 4, maybe 4 or 5. That's by Aaron Cooter. Let's see,
Oh,
I'm trying to
nice.
get
Yeah,
my head
Aaron
out.
Coder.
So yeah, this one. Whoops. Oof, let's see if I can do this. Okay, this one right here. This is an Iron Fist page. That's by Mike Perkins. That above is a from an Alpha Flight story I wrote from Alpha Flight True North. Came out, oh god, about 6 years ago now. That's Scott Hepburn. This is from Dead Man Logan. That's a Mike Henderson page. It's you probably can't see because it's fairly fine line from where you are, but that's
Yeah.
Glob Herman, who's one of my favorite characters. It's a scene where he's caught. Forge catches him on a dating website. Um, this is John at Christmas. It's a variant cover for Shelter #1. What's this? This is a Ninja Turtles,
Wow.
uh, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles X Files crossover issue I wrote for IDW
Wait,
about
what? Hold
12
up.
years ago.
I have to
That's
look this up.
Michael Walsh artwork, Adam Gorham inks. And then this last one that you can see here is Old Man Logan by Damien Casero, who's a guy I work with a lot. It's a ship. It's a shot of Logan getting aboard a ship with Alpha Flight, who had just returned from being in space for a long time. I like this. The fun thing for me about this page is any Canadian who's been away for a little while can relate to, is that Logan brings Puck uh, bag full of coffee crisp chocolate bars because Puck has not had them. They're only available up here in Canada.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then you can't see, but there's a
A whole
Dylan
bunch
Burnett
more.
X Force page uh, from X Force #4, which has got Strife and his MLF, and part of the reason I'll tilt it a bit here, maybe you can see it. My light is shining, but the part of the reason I love this page here is that two of the characters that I introduced to MLF are characters that are created when I was 12 years old,
Wow.
and then sort of brought out. This one here is another Michael Perkins. It's the very first page to my run on Iron Fist with him, and then this is a James Stocco cover
Oh
for
my God. That's
Cluster
awesome.
#1, which is a book I did through Boom about 10, 11 years ago, I think.
Dude, you own an original James Stocco piece. That
I
is,
do,
I mean,
yes.
applaud worthy right there. And
He's nice too, and he's one of the guys who was based out of Vancouver at the same time that I was living there.
Ed, who would you say is on your Mount Rushmore of like comic book artists? Whether that be maybe your own, inspiration growing up. Hey, these were my favorite, artists. I was trying to emulate, or even like fast forward now, like, hey, these are my favorite artists. It doesn't have to be definitive. Obviously, this could
Sure, yeah.
change any day. But who's on that Mount Rushmore?
I think like a really, really big guy for me early on. One of the guys who I think I idolized for a very long time, and who made me think that it was probably possible to get into comics, being a Canadian, was Todd McFarlane. He was
Oh yeah.
huge, huge for me growing
Hmm.
up. I was such a massive fan. I wanted to be Todd McFarlane growing up. I tried to draw like him. I could not come even close to drawing like him. Um,
Have you ever had a
when he
chance to meet him yet? Have you had a chance to meet him?
so I've never met him personally. I don't typically get starstruck, but I was at a convention in Vancouver years ago, and we were taking the elevator up to our room, and it was me and my wife in the elevator, and two people got on, and my wife, who I'm not a very expressive person all the time. I think my mood changes are very subtle and very not always perceptible to people. I think,
Yeah, low
but
key.
like, but my these two guys got on the elevator. My wife turned to me. She's like, "What's wrong?" Like, I'm like, she's like, "What's going on? What's wrong? What's wrong?" I'm like, just like,
Keep it
and
cool. Keep it cool. Keep it
it
real.
was Todd McFarlane and his dad, and my wife ended up talking to his dad, but I just couldn't. I was just, it was too much for me.
Yeah, you're just
But
taking in the moment.
yeah, I just, I'm not an extrovert by any stretch, and so for me to just be like, oh my god, I'm such a big fan, it's not possible.
Better
So
than
yeah,
how I probably would react. I probably would have screamed, "It's the Todd Father!
I
Not
I'm
worthy!"
I'm the opposite. So he's huge for me. There's an Italian artist named GP, who's a really incredible artist slash writer, who I would put on my Rushmore. Um, David Lapham, who did Stray Bullets, would be
Oh,
up there
yeah.
for me. Um, I think Frank Miller, like the Sin City Frank Miller stuff was like mind blowing for me when that
Game
when that
changer,
came
yeah.
out. So I think those are the folks I put it on. Now I'm looking at my shelf to see what else. I'm a big Edward Rizzo fan. Daniel Klaus um, is a big one for me as well.
Yeah, I'm looking at that, I'm looking at your shelf. It looks well stocked. I see a nice Essex County, hardcover, and,
Ye- uh,
and then, you showed off that SilverHawks figure that you bought. Do you still find time to go to the comic shop? Like, do you have a local comic shop that you frequent?
I do. Yeah. Strange Adventures is my shop. It's downtown Halifax,
Mm.
and I'm in there usually once a week.
Oh,
Pick up
cool.
some stuff. I try and keep reading. I'm just trying to think of. Yeah, here's my latest pickups from the
Got
past week,
Destro, Man's Best, which was awesome.
and then the new Charles Burns Final
Oh,
Cut.
nice, nice.
Um, and there were some single issues there, are not here. They're in the early room, but yeah. So I try and get down there once a week. I tend to gravitate more towards trades than I do single
Mhm.
issues these days, just because I've moved so many times that I'm done moving
Oh,
short and
yeah.
long boxes.
You learn the ultimate lesson that all comic fans eventually learn, whether that, be early or after you've almost destroyed your spine and back. Is that it's extremely difficult to one to store all those long and short boxes. But when it comes time for moving day, that's when you really learn the
Yes,
lesson of those short boxes, long boxes. It's a lot easier to pack up a bunch of hardcovers. Now those tend to get heavy too, though. Like, let's not be
that's
real.
why
Those
you
are
get
not.
movers. Yeah. But yeah, I think this is short boxes, long boxes. They just take up a lot of room. They're hard to store.
Yeah, and they don't display as well as like a
Yeah,
nice, like, collected edition or something like that.
and I find I don't go back to read single
Mm.
issues, and I'm not a guy who is like I'm not like an investment collector or something
Yeah,
like that.
same, same.
I'm not gonna sell things
Yeah.
down the road. So I try to keep there's two bookshelves side by side here, and I try to keep just the two shelves. So when they start getting full, and you can see, because that Essex County, because it's pointed out like that, is because there's no room, and So I have to actually this a thing that I do generally the first month of every year is I go through and I cull.
Oh,
I
wow.
pull out things, I bring them down, trade them in for credit, or just sell them or give them away or whatever.
Smart, smart.
And then I try and keep just 2 shelves. It's really tough. By nature, I am a giant book collector, but, like, my wife and I both used to work at a bookstore for several years, and, we got really good discounts on books that were already discounted,
Oh my god, you're
and we had
speaking
a
my language.
massive, massive collection, but when we left Vancouver in 2016, we donated the majority of our books, and it was 3 pickup trucks
Holy shit.
full of, of books,
Whoa.
like boxes of books. Like it was
I
so many and so bad
wow.
that I've had to like impose limits on myself to keep this under control.
Ed, I like hearing all of that. I'm someone that is, I am all for like kind of self-imposed limits. I mean, within reason, obviously, but especially when it comes to like hoarding and collecting. Like sometimes you just got to be like, anything past this shelf is getting donated, and I've started
Yeah,
implementing something like that as well. I think store credit is kind of like my little cheat code. I'm like, all right, well,
yeah, for sure.
I'll trade in, these 5 trades for just one really nice one that'll fit on the shelf. So, um, but on the topic of like books and collecting and reading, you just reminded me something. I was reading an article, or I came across some website that was interviewing you, and you mentioned that you mentioned you were talking about downtime and how that is something that comic creators that break in don't tell, like new comic creators that are also breaking in, like the difficulty of finding downtime. That like once you break into the industry, and if you're hot and you got a name for yourself, like the work typically not only comes in, but it comes in, but like as if like a faucet is,
It's a
opening up.
tsunami. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So like finding downtime and like, a way to separate yourself from work becomes even more challenging. Have you found, do you feel like you are in a better position now of finding downtime and making time, whether that be for family or video games or just enjoying reading? Like, what are some tips to like managing your time better and embracing downtime?
Yeah, so I tend to try and work Monday through Friday. So,
Mm,
even though I'm writing I'm writing I think 3 comic books actively at the moment on top of working full time in video games. So what I do is every day I try and get up a couple hours early. I sit down and write comics. Then I start my 9 to 5 job writing. I log in, I work from home.
mhm,
Um, 5 o'clock, I log off. I tend to do an hour and a half to 2 hours of working,
mhm.
and then I shut my computer down. I don't look at it again. I cook dinner for everyone. We'll go out to my wife and I will go to the gym and 3 times a week and try and get into some
Yeah,
semblance of
something
shape here.
physical.
But just I find that going to the gym like just um, sweating out some of the anxiety throughout the day. And I'm
Yeah.
somebody, and I'm not saying I want to be clear. I'm not saying that like exercise is like the solution to any like anxiety or anything like that.
But it's a
But
big
for
help.
me,
But
I
it is a
find
big
that
help.
at the end of the day, yeah, if I can get out and I can sweat some things out, especially like I get in my own head a lot, and so if I can just kind of sweat it out a bit,
Yeah,
I
I feel you.
find that it helps me a bit. It helps me sleep as well, which is great. And
Yes.
then I come home and we watch a movie together. So it's pretty regimented. Like so my weekdays are not terribly exciting. Um, Saturday and Sunday, Saturday I never work. Like it's like an imposed thing. I will never work on a Saturday, so I'm not doing uh even on podcasts and stuff. And I feel like a dink turning down podcasts on Saturdays, but it's just like that's a day that is always guaranteed. I'm going to be hanging out with my wife and my kid generally works for a few hours on Saturdays. She's got a job. My wife and I have both gotten into photography over the last year, so
Oh,
we
cool.
tend to take our cameras and go on photo walks or drive somewhere where we can take photos and just kind of get out of our head. We have some friends that we meet for breakfast usually on Saturday as well. um, and then Sunday, 90% of the time I take Sunday off, but Sunday's like kind of that flex day where if I really need to work for whatever reason, like if I really need to get something done, I'll work on Sunday. But I try and take weekends off, and I know it's really hard. Like especially yeah, when you're new, when you're getting into the industry, if you have like one or two hits, all of a sudden things are thrown at you, and this is the thing you've dreamed about doing for your entire life. It's really hard to say no,
Hmm.
and I think all it takes is like taking on that book that you know you shouldn't have, right? Like there's for me, early days, I was offered a book that really with my schedule uh, was already pretty full. I should have turned it down. It was also like a book that I was not super excited about comparatively, right, to everything else I was writing. But I took it because I felt I had to, and to this day, I still regret that because I don't think I
Hmm.
gave the book everything that it needed. I just couldn't connect with it, and I didn't have time to really properly connect with it. But yeah, I think you need that downtime. I think you need time to read, to just shut everything off. Like to not be behind a computer, to just go outside or just kind of like read a book and listen to some music or
Hmm.
whatever it is, whatever your peaceful thing is.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's just super important. And I like I see people burn out because they're just going round the clock and they're not stopping and they're working through their weekends and look, it's hard to turn down money, right? Like it's hard to turn down paying gigs, but it wears on you. And I think
Yeah.
I worked in health and safety before I worked in comics, and so there's a lot of this stuff that I had to write about there that sort of I think just through the process of osmosis is just always in the back of my brain, something I'm always thinking about.
No, those are some solid tips, man. I am all for, sometimes taking a step back, a step away, because, you just end up like, just it just kind of consumes you. Sometimes you just need a fresh eye, like, just to be reminded of the other things that, you're
Sure.
working towards, the other things that you like. Um,
And
and
I
just,
think even when you're working, like I will just get up and I will go for a walk around the block, or walk anywhere if I just need to get away
yeah,
from the keyboard. I'm still thinking about the stuff. I'm still working things out, but I think there's
it's like a new environment. Sometimes like a new environment is all
it
you
helps.
need.
But like you're not like working when you're writing. It's not just about hitting keys on the keyboard, right?
Hmm.
It's about working through the process, working through the story. And sometimes you can't do that behind a computer. Sometimes it's got to happen when you're out, when you're just going for a stroll and you're shutting your brain off a little bit. And I find that anytime I can stop thinking about work, it's like finally when the solutions come, right?
Yeah.
Uh, anyway,
And hearing you mention and talk about all the different pieces of original art that you have, and the goal being like you only you only get a piece if it's a project that you've worked on. I mean, just from the artwork on your wall, I think tells the story of your career, which is you mentioned 2012 kind of like breaking in, and then obviously we're looking at a 12 plus year career, still going strong. Every publisher underneath your belt, Marvel, DC, Image, Boom, etc. Is there maybe one or however many come to mind? Are there any projects that really come to mind for you when it comes to what helped you elevate or become a stronger writer? Like, is there a title or a project that like maybe really pushed you to go to reach that next level of being a comic writer?
I think Murder Book, which I talked about a bit earlier, the thing that I just when I stopped drawing, I just focused on writing
Mhm.
that. That was very much even when I was drawing my own stuff. I was doing a lot of autobio comics. I was doing more like indie style stuff. Um, Most of it I was kind of doing for myself, but there was always that like kind of like thought of the audience, like who
Mhm.
reading this and what are they going to like and stuff. And when I started doing Murder Book, it was literally just I was writing uh, to please myself. Like I was
Hmm.
writing things that I wanted to read. I was writing the kind of stories I wanted to read, and I was less concerned about like who's going to like this and more concerned with do I like this.
Hmm.
And it sounds like a very simple thing, in terms of like writing, like how much is this about me and how much is this about like sort of trying to meet some sort of expectation that some faceless fan out there might have. And I think that is what sort of like really pushed me when I sort of tapped into that energy. Really pushed me, and it's a thing that I need periodic reminders. You know, you kind of get caught up in writing for other companies, and they have expectations and stuff, um, and it's easy to kind of lose that thread. And so I constantly need to remind myself that this is a thing. I need to write for the audience of me first, and then, you know, if it's something that I can, you know, feel good about, then theoretically, other people are going to react
Yeah.
to the thing that I'm liking about it. So yeah, Murder Book is a big one. I think that uh, both Comeback and Sheltered, which were my first two creator owned, I think really helped sort of cement sort of like the kind of voice and what I wanted to say, kind of stories I wanted to tell.
Because you
And I, oh, go ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry, because the other thing about your career that I find fascinating is that you've got a good balance of creator owned as well as working and playing in other people's sandbox. Do you have? I mean, I feel like I kind of know the answer, but like, how different is your process or approach when it comes to like doing the creator owned route or playing in someone else's sandbox, whether it be like Marvel, DC, or or in this case Silverhawks, like do you have a preference? And then obviously, like, how does your approach change?
So I like doing both. I like having a healthy balance of both, which I know sounds like a cop out answer, but
No.
it's the truth. I really enjoy doing creator owned. I really, but for me with creator owned projects, they're typically things that I stew over and think about for a long time
Hmm.
before I start. You know, like I have a project that right now that I want to do, but you know, I've been thinking about it for a year already, and I can see myself going another 2 years
Hmm.
trying to figure it out because there's a lot of moving parts before I have it. Um, you know, the real difference is really that like there are more guardrails when you're doing stuff for work for hire. Like if you know if I'm doing a Silverhawks or if I'm doing a uh, uh, a Marvel or a DC book, there's guardrails. There's certain things I can't do. Right? Like I can't come in and kill Batman. I can't come in and kill Spider Man. Um, which is, you know, I'm not saying I want to come in and kill every character, but like there are certain
Yeah.
guardrails. So there are certain things where kind of you have to almost like you can't destroy the toys, right? Like you because after you, there's going to be somebody else, and you need
Yep.
to leave them in a position where they can pick them up and tell their stories. Whereas I don't have that same uh, worry or concern when I'm when I'm doing creator owned. It's just me and the artist that the two of us have to be satisfied.
Yeah.
You know, and and that's all. That's the only audience I really initially have to worry about satisfying. I don't have to worry about the editor, the licensor, or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, but I think once I get into it, there's not a ton of difference beyond that. I think I'm just trying to tell good stories. But one, there's no blueprint. There's no 20 years of continuity that I have to worry about. Whereas that is something I have to
Hmm.
consider when I tell a story for another publisher.
And I'm glad you said that because I know that question for some maybe listening sounds like a very straightforward duh butter type of question. But I have heard from other creators that have said that the amount of work that you put into a creator owned sometimes can be a way more. It can be very more. It can be a lot more intense. And then like you had mentioned, some of that you can get in your head about things. You can overthink things. And some creators prefer like to have like those guardrails to know like, okay, this is what I can and can't do. Here's what's already been established. Like I know that I can only pull the rubber band back so far. And, there's a sense of, I guess, reassurance or ease to like maybe working with an established character, even though they may have like years and years and years of continuity. Like you just know, where you stand. And sometimes, you know what they say, like sometimes having rules and parameters. I mean, this is one hell of a stretch, but like you were saying about like the bookcases, like that hey, I can only fill these two bookcases up, and everything else, you don't got to worry about. So I guess
Right.
I find it interesting to, you know hearing from creators on how they democratize or I'm trying to think of the word, but like just leverage brain power and time because I know that sometimes is a valuable resource in itself to keep
For
yourself from
sure.
feeling burnt out and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that the idea that like a creator owned is more work is definitely 100% true. Um, because you're starting with nothing, right? Like
Yeah.
at least if I'm writing a Batman story or whatever, then we know that his parents were killed in an alley.
Hmm.
We know he's got Robin. We know he's got
Yeah.
this where
There's things that you don't
fucked
have
up.
to think about.
There's
Yeah.
already there. There's a stage already kind of set for you, and it's up to you how you're going to rearrange and play
Hmm.
there. But like, yeah, when I we did something like Comeback or Sheltered or The Displaced, it was all new. Everything was being built from the ground up. So there's definitely a lot more legwork in sort of establishing the world, establishing the characters, and writing. But I find that with a lot of creator on, once I get into that zone, once I'm writing it, it sometimes comes easier than it does work for hire.
Well said. And I guess almost an hour into this interview, let's like really get to talking about Silverhawks, which I wouldn't say has a lot of continuity, but it's also not a brand new, it's not a brand new
Right.
thing. We're talking about an almost 40-year franchise and property that is coming to light again. You were given the responsibility of bringing Silverhawks back into the forefront after almost 40 years of the characters and the IP just not being used. I want to know what was the inception of you getting this opportunity to write Silverhawks for Dynamite.
This was me lobbying for the book hard.
I like a
When
good
Declan,
lobbying.
yeah, when Declan was first announced that he was writing Thundercats,
Hmm.
I reached out to him and I was like, I need to know when they're doing Silverhawks. Like if Thundercats takes off and they're going to do
This is your
Silverhawks,
way in, yeah.
I want to know and I want in. And I've known Declan for a long time, so I could reach out to him and I'm
Mhm.
like, so basically I just said like if they're doing Silverhawks, just please put my name in the hat, in the ring, and I would bug him every so often, and then Nate reached out to me, who's the editor
Mhm.
on Thundercats, about writing the Thundercats Apex one shot. And when he called me, I was like immediately out. I'm like, "Is this about Silverhawks? Is this?" And he's like, "No, no, we're doing the Thundercats book." He's like, "You want to write Silverhawks?" And I was like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Are you guys doing a Silverhawks book?" And they hadn't planned one. And I was like, "Look, I love Silverhawks. So if you are doing one, please like let me know. Let me have a crack at it." And it was within a week that he called me back and said, like if you want to write it, then let's
Oh,
do it.
wow, you okay,
Uh,
so you were not playing, you actually, like, but through
yeah,
the
I
power
lobbied
of
for it.
lobbying, you've brought
It
it
was
into
it was a bit of a
brought it to
harassment.
life.
Yes, I feel like I manifested this book in some ways.
Yeah, there we
Uh,
go.
but yeah, I'm so like that's not something that generally works. Like harassing an editor until you can have a book. And I was harassing. I was like just soft poking them about it,
So
but still, it's a thing that I wanted to write. I had some ideas, and so uh, when Nate called me back and did offer it to me, he and I had conversations that we were talking about influences and kind of things that we wanted to take the
mm,
book. We were both very much on the same page, both approaching it as this like sort of untouchables in space type
hmm,
story. Some of the touch points we had were like, we were talking about homicide life in the streets, which is a favorite show of mine from back in the day. And so we're bringing some of that like sort of like, you know, um, procedural and I hate using the word gritty, but like more like feet on the ground
yeah,
style uh, cop type stories to this book, even though it's still a very fantastical future
yep.
sci-fi high flying adventure. We still have these moments that are very much grounded, so that each of the characters are grounded. The sort of motivations are grounded. It's just the action that's just you know it's big, explosive.
Okay, because I was gonna ask what was it about Silverhawks that made you push for it so hard, and so it sounds like the ability. One, you mentioned earlier that you were always a fan of kind of like that noir storytelling and crime procedurals and things like that. So it sounds like Silverhawks is kind of like the perfect vehicle to scratch that itch, tell that story, and I would assume it's also because the badass character designs. Because like I said, I think they are the character designs still hold up for me.
I agree that they look killer. They still look killer.
Yeah,
They're
slick.
amazing. They're a lot of fun to play around with. I think that the one of the things that I really like about Silverhawks is there's a lot of like fertile territory there for telling
Hmm.
the stories because the cartoon, they kind of introduce the characters pretty quickly, and then we have this sort of adventure of the week, and we hear about a lot of places, but we never
Hmm.
really see them. We don't know a lot about the backgrounds of any of the characters beyond like a sentence or two that were told in the first episode. So there's we know who the characters are from watching the show week to week or from day to day, over the course of the 65 episodes, but we don't get a whole lot of background on them. We don't even know what Bluegrass's real name is in the show. Like it's never mentioned. Hot Wing, we don't know what his real name is either. Like so like the thing I like is that we can take that and like expand upon
Hmm.
it and explore who these characters are, and what their names are, and where they come from and what their backstory is, and why they would agree to sign up for this program where they're giving up half of their most of their organic body and becoming
Hmm.
these sort of RoboCop like officers, like so like why would they do that, and so we explore like how Monstar impacted their lives, like directly or indirectly, or how members of their crime cartel have pushed them to this point in their lives that they want to join up. So we get a lot more backstory about the characters going in, and we take our time sort of putting the team together.
Awesome action figures aside, I was trying to see like what Silverhawk stuff has, is out there. You mentioned there's 65 episodes of the cartoon that ran for about a year in 1986, and then there was 7 issues of a Marvel comic series adaptation. I think from like '87. So not a lot. And like I said, this is the first Silverhawks anything that we've had in almost 40 years. How much of the existing content, shows or comics, like, did you research or watch or read to,
Yeah,
like, get
all of it.
ready? Oh,
Read
wow,
the
all
comics. The
65 episodes.
comics are mostly just like episodes in
Got it, got it.
comic form. Although in the comic they do give Bluegrass a name, which they don't do on the show. But
I gotta know now, what's Bluegrass's real name in the comics?
T Boone Pickens,
Of
uh,
course.
which is also the name as like some industrialist from the
Oh, man, that's good.
or a businessman from the early
That's
1900s.
better than anything I could have, come up on the spot. T. Boone Pickens,
It
AKA
fits,
Bluegrass.
right? Like
Yeah,
it
it
fits
does.
for him.
It works.
But yeah, so I've gone through. I own the series, so I'm on my second rewatch right now
Okay.
of it. So yeah, I dipped into all of that stuff because as I want to as much as I want to make it feel modern, I still want to keep that sort of like
Yeah.
vibe of the old show. Even in terms of like we're updating a few designs and stuff like that, but just like more like making it feel a little bit more modern. But like I still love the idea because it's set in sort of the far flung future, and I like the idea of building a future, but as though you're in the 80s
Hmm.
looking forward rather than like through our lens now looking
Yeah.
forward, because now we would have all sorts of like I don't know, like everyone would have an iPhone or some whatever the version of the iPhone is, a thousand years in the future. um I wanted to keep it like I like the sort of like vision of future tech in the cartoon, and so really we're kind of expanding on that and
Hmm.
playing around with it because I think that's a fun. And it's a thing that's unique to the book, but still making it feel like I think we're making it feel fairly modern.
Now, I guess, like, during your research, because one thing I will say about those '80s, cartoons and shows from the '80s is that they all seem to have, like, a dedicated fan base, whether that show was, like, a giant global success or just kind of like, maybe not as big. They all seem to have, like, a pretty dedicated fan base. Did you learn anything interesting about maybe the fandom, the fan base, or, like, the behind the scenes creation of the show that, like, it might be interesting to share?
I didn't delve too deeply into the fandom or the behind the scenes stuff. I tried to keep my focus really on the content that was
Okay.
there. I did dig around, about with some of the actors and such, but um, and just like a little bit of the history. But I mostly like I'd like to keep my focus just on the stuff that we know
Got it.
and that you could know conceivably from having watched the show and or read the 7 issue comics.
So I'm assuming you had pretty much like free reign when it came to like the story you want to tell. I guess you know with us talking about like the guardrails when it comes to like already established characters and IP. Like, did you find maybe a wider lane to play in because it's been so long, or
Yeah, they've been pretty chill, and I don't know if this is just because I've written a lot of licensed stuff over
hmm,
the years
yeah,
that I just intuitively know
how
uh,
far you can go?
how far I can push, and I do try and push um, sometimes at the boundaries. Like when I was writing Predator, every so often I would push just to see what I could get away with, right? And because there's some things I thought, there's no way they would let me do, and turns out I was right. They they wouldn't let me do it, and other things that I thought were really interesting ideas, but I didn't know if they would go for that they did. So that was something that I think was great. So I think I don't normally, not in the last like I would say 8 9 years, if I've written anything licensed, I don't tend to get a ton of pushback.
Hmm,
And again, I don't know if it's just because I have enough experience writing
yeah.
licensed stuff that intuitively I just know this is what I can kind of get away with. I think that right now I have a great example with what Declan and Drew have done over in Thundercat, so I can I have a sense of where the comfort level is with the
Hmm.
studio for changing things because with the Thundercat series, there's stuff that has changed from the original cartoon, but it still has that feel of the original cartoon, even if some things have gone slightly in different directions. Um,
Now,
but yeah,
do you get the freedom to, I guess, introduce new characters when it comes to this, or are they like, hey, only play with the
yeah,
characters
yeah.
already
No,
established? Oh, cool.
so in Thundercats Lost, which comes out in March, which is a book I'm writing about the second season Thundercats that came in,
Oh,
which
awesome.
is Lengso, Bengali, and Pumura. There we introduced two new uh, Thundercats onto the team, and even villain side, we have a villain. The main bad guy is from the original cartoon, but his sort of right hand guy who's driving the whole thing is a creation of Rafa and I. In Silverhawks, um, I don't know how much this is a spoiler. I'm just going to say it anyway. But one of the things that we talk about in Silverhawks is that the Silverhawks that you know and love, like the Quicksilver,
Hmm.
Steel Will, Steelheart, etc., they are actually like second generation Silverhawks, and it's kind of implied in the cartoon
Oh,
that
wow.
that because there's Condor
Hmm.
comes in later, who was like an early sort of like Silverhawk who fought alongside Stargazer. So we have in the first issue we introduce these like the first generation Silverhawks who were around like 100 years ago. Because right now, when we come into the series, the Galaxy, Bedlama and the Galaxy of Limbo, it's in a time of like relative peace because Monstar has been behind bars for 100 plus years, and the original Silverhawks, led by Stargazer, were the people who took him down the first time. But now that Monstar's out of prison and he's you know causing all sorts of chaos around the galaxy. They need to shut them down. But the original Silverhawks are all they're retired, they're older, they're arthritic. There's no way. Like even at their peak, they barely took them down. Right? They
Wow.
barely did it. So there, this is how we bring in our new Silverhawks, and they get trained through the old Silverhawks. So yeah, we introduce Condor and Stargazer were already in the original series, but there's four, five. I'm bad with counting right now. Four or five other new old Silverhawks that we're introducing in the first issue.
Okay, yeah, I was about to, I'm looking at the solicitation now, and they list Commander Stargazer, Quicksilver, Bluegrass, Hot Wings, Steel Will, Steel Heart, and the Copper Kid. I just like the Copper Kid a lot.
Yeah,
It just feels like I'm an old Western cowboy, the Copper
yeah,
Kid.
yeah.
Um,
So those are our heroes. Those are the ones
cool.
that you know and love. So we do have older Silverhawks. I won't name. I'll let everyone discover them when the first issue
Cool.
comes out. But that was one of the things that came from us. George and I came up with these characters, introduced them in the book. No pushback. Everyone seems cool with the idea.
Good
They
stuff.
like so far. I haven't done anything that I've had any real pushback on. So
And I'm glad you brought up George. And we're talking about the series artist George. Help me out here again.
Cabadias.
Cambadias. George Cambadias. What did what do you feel like George brings to the table in terms of his art style and updating the characters and giving them like a pun intended a fresh polish?
So yeah, George is he's good. He's a guy who like he and I have talked a little bit over the years about like finding a project to work together on. He's got such he's got it such a unique style. He doesn't look like any other artist out there on the shelf, right? His
Hmm.
art's incredibly unique. He's really good with handling like tech in a very interesting and different way. I think from a lot of other artists, his art style's super kinetic. He's got like sort of like there's some manga influence in there a little
Hmm.
bit, uh, and you can see that in a lot of the action sequences and stuff. So he's bringing like a really great sense of energy to the book, but he's also pretty good or he's really good at the quiet moments, the emotional moments, the like the heavy moments. He handles those with equal measure. He's great. He's been a great collaborator. His designs, like we did a very light touch in terms of redesigning any of the Silverhawks.
Yeah.
In fact, most of them look almost identical to what they did.
If it ain't
We,
broke, don't fix it, right?
yes, but we did give um, Bluegrass a slight update. Uh, and it's super minor. And I think when people see it, they'll be like, "Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Oh, I can't wait to see it
It's
now.
good." And then Hot Wing as well. We just gave him a little bit of an update, mostly in the way that we handle the flames on his armor.
Okay, and I'm looking through the solicitations now, and there's solicitations up to issue 3, which would come out on March 26th. Is this? I guess how many issues is this first run planned out for? Are we
So it's an
thinking?
ongoing. So
Oh,
hopefully,
fantastic!
it goes on forever. I have plotted at 10 issues.
Oh, hell yeah! Okay,
So
Ed.
assuming nothing goes terribly wrong, then we get at least 10 issues in the can, and based on the success of Thundercats, I'm hoping that we can surpass 10 issues and keep going.
And speaking of Thundercats, because I'm hearing you talk about Declan Shelby, the success he's having with Thundercats. I mean, that series has been knocking it out the park. I mean, they've they're still going, and that's awesome to see. You mentioned writing Thundercats, the one shot last year. I think it's called Apex.
Yep.
You got Lost coming out. You got Silverhawks coming out. It looks like Dynamite has got a monopoly on everyone's favorite 80s cartoons, and I'm curious and excited to see if we get any kind of crossovers because I feel like this is just kind of like prime in the making. I guess without spoiling anything, are we talking high likelihood, low likelihood?
Honestly, I don't know. Like, it's definitely on their radar. It's
Ed,
definitely
you've got the
something.
power. If you've
I
just if you've
it
expressed anything, is that your lobbying skills could
right.
make this happen.
Yeah, it's something that's been discussed. It's something that I think Dynamite is very aware that people are sort of hungry for. But I think the important thing is first to establish each book as its own thing and not rush into it. Like I
Yeah,
think that
that's fair.
let's give Silverhawks time to breathe and build its audience and ensure that it stands on its own. Same with Thundercats Lost. Let's make sure it's established, it's entrenched, that it has its own voice, it's its own thing. And I think then is the time to start looking at doing crossovers. I definitely have ideas. I've thrown ideas at Nate for how I think
Keep throwing them, Ed.
how we could get into that sort of that territory, and I think I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. I think it's just a matter of time, probably.
There we go, Ed. It's no pressure, but it's
All
all
right,
on you, buddy.
perfect.
All right, Ed. I got one more question about Silverhawks. One thing that among the many great things that Dynamite does when it comes to their comics, they do variant covers very well. I mean, it's especially when it comes to like a first issue release. you can set your clock to it. Dynamite is going to have some killer variant covers and additional cover offerings. And I'm looking at the variant covers for issue 1, and you've got covers from Jay Lee, who always I think he is my favorite Dynamite cover artist out there. I mean, he has just a way of making any property he gets his hands on even cooler. But you got Jay Lee variant cover, you got a James Stocco variant cover, Declan Shelby is in the mix as well. How involved? One, have you had a chance to see all the variant covers for
I think
Silverhawks one?
I've seen most of them,
Hmm.
but like I was on a podcast earlier today where they put one on screen that I hadn't seen before.
Oh wow!
So so clearly I haven't seen them all. But yeah, I've seen most of them. Nate's pretty good about sharing them, but
Holy shit! There
uh,
is a Mark Bagley variant cover that
there
I'm
is,
looking
yes.
at. Is mind blowing. So okay, so you get shown some of these later, some of these other variant covers as they come in. Is there maybe one in particular that maybe stands out among the ones that you've seen so far?
I Man, I feel like I would feel weird picking favorites, but I'm a big fan of I like all the covers. The Jay Lee, whoops, cover is
Yes.
my phone
Oh, that's your
screen.
phone background. That's cool.
Um, but I love the Declan one as well. But the James, I'm just a big fan of James Stocco, so I was very excited that we could get him to do the variant
Yeah, that's
covers,
badass.
and he's got some like really kind of crazy '80s energy going on those covers.
Yeah, this looks incredible, and in true James Stokoe fashion. Oh yeah, yeah. You've got. I mean, that is always. You know what I'm saying? Like, I had a chance to read actually the first issue of Silverhawks. I had a lot of fun. I'm excited to see where you go with it. And whenever you do get a chance to introduce my boy Bluegrass, aka what is it? T Pickens Boone.
Yeah, T Boone Pickens.
T
That's
Boone
issue. That's
Pickens.
issue two.
I'm looking forward to that,
Uh,
and the Monstar transformation reveal. But it never hurts to have like your pick of an awesome like cover aside from like the cover A, and that is full respect to George Camp. I will practice saying that last name.
and look, I only think I'm saying it right. I've never actually, George and I have contacted through chat and through
Yeah.
messages, but we've actually never spoken,
Oh
and I've
wow,
never
interesting.
gotten the clarity. Like we just, we'll message
Okay.
each other, and
Yeah.
but I've never gotten the clarity. So that's a thing I think I need to do.
Look, there's a lot of great covers queued up for Silverhawks, especially issue 1. So I recommend, if, to the listeners that to check out the full list and make your pick from there. Ed, I want to before we wrap up, I have a question for you that was submitted from a listener. That's one of the perks of being a patron of the show and a Patreon subscriber is that I will reach out to the patrons and ask and tell them about these interviews and have them send in any questions if anyone's like a big fan. And I think it's safe to say I might have found one of your biggest fans because
All right, we'll
he
see.
sent something in. So here we go. This is from a good friend of the show, Jeff Fremid. He sent in a voicemail with a couple of questions for you, and I want to play it.
All right.
Yo, Short Box Nation. Big Jeff here, wishing everyone the best in this new year. Ed, I've been a fan of your writing for over a decade now, from Murder Book through Predator the Last Hunt. Greatly looking forward to your reinvention of Silverhawks that's coming out. Your Iron Man run is my favorite since Matt Fraction. So, first question, if you were given the opportunity to do a team up with any character of your choosing, who would that be? Who'd the group be? Mine would be old school Power Man and Iron Fist. Luke Cage Hero for Hire was the first comic I ever bought back in the 70s. Big fan of horror. The Silver Coin was amazing. Do you have any horror projects on the horizon that you're working on? And lastly, can we please get you to come to our city of Jacksonville, our fair city, that hosts Collective Con every March? Would love to see you there. Thanks. Peace.
Big shout outs to Jeff and those crows cocking in the back as well. They want to be a part of it as well. He put you in a pretty high regard. He said
I
your
think
Iron Man run, one of the highest.
I think you meant Iron Fist, but yeah, yeah. But yeah, Iron Fist, I loved writing. To answer his question, if I did a team up, with Iron Fist, who I'd want, and I mean, Luke Cage is like the obvious sort of answer.
Hmm.
Um, the other answer too, I think for me is just I always love the interaction between Iron Fist and Matt Murdock and Daredevil.
Oh,
So
nice. Yeah.
that's another thing. Those two together. I know they've had their sort of run-ins and such. Uh, so that might be another one for me because I'm just a big Daredevil fan as well. I love Iron Fist. I love Daredevil. Um, but it would probably be Luke Cage, honestly. I'd probably uh, side with him on that. And in terms, he asked if I have any other horror stuff in the works. I think I mentioned already. I did the Creep Show short story.
Yep.
Out now, I do one of the four projects I have coming out this year is a horror project that I have been working on for about 2 years. It's something I'm very excited about. It's obviously it's not announced yet, so I can't say too much. I'm reteaming with Damien Casero, who's an artist I've worked with
Oh, nice.
a bunch. We worked on Cluster together. We worked on Sons of Anarchy together. We worked on Lord, I don't know. He was on Iron Fist last couple issues. We did a Ghost Rider 2099. He's an artist I've worked with the most over the last 20 years. A great guy, and we've got he's done designs for the lead character in this. It's this yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but it's this kind of like throwback to 80s slasher movies, which is like what I grew up on, and I think it's a really fun take on it. And that will be out later this year. So I guess just keep an eye out for an announcement with Damien and I working on something together, and then you'll know what it is. But it's straight horror in a very fun and interesting way.
Good stuff. And then Ed, do you have any conventions planned for this year?
No, so I have I'm doing one later this year. It's not been announced. It's in August, and so I don't want to sort of jump the show and announce
Mhm.
ahead of them. But no, I don't really have anything else planned. I've been kind of taking it easy on cons for the last couple of years. Just like uh, I don't know. I think the pandemic, the first couple of years of pandemic, where nothing was happened, really trained me to just like to be at home a lot.
Yeah.
Uh, Even normally, I go to New York Comic Con every year, and I skipped this last one and just went on a vacation with my wife instead, which after 12, 13 years of working in comics was not something I realized you could do. Go to con and go on a
Yeah.
vacation that's not comic book related at all. um, so yeah, I just had that one booked. I've been talking to a couple. I'm still sort of considering a few shows for this year and next, but I've not really. I'm kind of I have something coming up in
Yeah.
March that will kind of decide uh, kind of what the rest of my year is going to look like, and so I don't want to commit to anything before I know what's happening with this thing, um, and that hopefully will be some big news that I can announce then.
Okay.
But
Well, look, if you're
yeah.
ever in search of warmer weather, I got to connect that collective con. I can get you in. We'd welcome you with open arms, Ed.
Well, tell them to reach out to me, through my site or whatever, and
Oh, bet. Okay.
we can definitely discuss because warmer weather during the winters here is something I'm more than interested in.
All right, say less. All right, Ed. One last question for you, and this one is for all of the aspiring comic writers that want to be the next Ed Brisson. If you could give a piece of advice for the aspiring, comic creator that's listening, that is trying to break in and tell their stories, and things like that, and maybe a piece of advice that you wish you would have gotten when you first, got into the industry, that maybe would have made your life a whole lot easier. What would that be?
So I think the advice I tend to give out to anyone who wants to get into comics is if you haven't made a comic already, make a comic. It's just you have to do it. If you want to get in this industry, you have to have something to show that you can do it. And with that in mind, I always advise start small. Start with a 5-page story, a 10-page story, whatever. Set yourself actual deadlines. Stay on your deadlines. Make sure that you know you can do the work in the prescribed amount of time. When I started, when I really want to break in, I started with a murder book, the short crime stories. There were five to, I think my longest one was 20 pages, but primarily 5 to 12 pages. And I would write these. I would give myself like a 2 week schedule, which is like ample
Hmm.
opportunity to write um, a 5 page story. For me right now, if I had, I generally have to write, 4 pages a day just to stay on schedule. So like 2 weeks for 5 pages is nothing. Write it, give yourself a deadline for first draft, give yourself a deadline for editing, and then once it's complete, try and find an artist who can draw it, which is, I know, easier said than done. It's
Hmm.
hard. If you don't know anyone who's willing to sort of draw something, it can be very expensive. If you are working with somebody who's like willing to draw like a 5 page story for portfolio or whatever, they half own that. The one thing I always want to say, if you're working with an artist and they're giving you your time, you're giving them ownership. You have to.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's just the way it is. But yeah, start small. Just do 5 page stories, do 10 page stories, whatever, and try and see it right through to completion. I think the thing, and make sure it has a beginning, middle, and an end. And the thing about that is, when you do a 5 page story, when you do a 10 page story, you get these like dopamine hits of this complete thing that is you, that is yours, that you created, or you and an artist, or if you're
Hmm.
an artist, you and a writer created together. This is like your baby. This is the thing you put out into the world, and having that sense of completion is super important. I think you need these things um, to keep propelling you forward, to know that you can do that and have these sort of positive moments. And you're not going to get that if you try and do like a Game of Thrones style epic that's going to be, that you think is going to be a Cerebus 300
Hmm.
issue run, right? That's just not possible, not plausible. And I don't know why it's a thing that a lot of people starting out think they're going to do. I run into it a lot. Just start small, stories beginning, middle, and end. And that's really like it allows you to complete things, allows you to have like you start building a portfolio,
Yeah.
allows you to really hone in on your voice, and learn who you are as a writer, and learn how to put things together. So start with the small, like I mentioned it earlier. I'm all about like doing bite-sized things to accomplish a larger thing. So start doing these stories. Don't have it end with a like to be continued. Make sure it ends, and then just do another story that's 5, 10 pages. Once it's done, put it online for people to read for free.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, put them into mini comics or zines, or however you want to print it. Do a short run print through a Kablam or whatever the short run publishers that are around now, and bring them to shows. Give them to writers that you like or artists that you like, just for feedback. Oh, pardon me. Um, and yeah, just kind of keep pushing forward and trying to improve on the last thing you did, um, with each new project. And really, that's it. Just like start small, start just doing these things, completing these things. Um, and then sort of start building. That's also kind of like where you start building relationships with artists, or other writers or whatever. Ideally, also, if you're trying to get into, find writers and artists who will give you honest feedback
Hmm.
on your work, who aren't afraid to just be like, no, like this isn't working. Like the crappy version of this is like, I used to have a friend who was an artist, and he worked in a studio with other artists who were trying to get into the industry. And one of them would just come in the room, and if someone was working on a page, he would just take like a black marker and go,
Oof.
just cross out a panel. He's like, that panel's garbage. and
Damn.
and that's a terrible version of it, but also you need
Yeah.
somebody
Brutal
who's
honesty.
that honest, right? Who will just
Hmm.
say like, but ideally someone who's not going to be like, this is terrible. They'll tell you why it's not working. And that's tough. Like, it's tough for a lot of people to hear. It's tough for a lot of people to take any sort of criticism.
Yeah.
Weirdly, this is the second time I've talked about this today, but like when I came out of high school, I went into fine arts because I wanted to be an artist. And one of the things we did first year in one of my classes is that we would create pieces. And once a piece was complete, once our deadline was due, one of the things we had to do is we had to go through a critique, which is we would stand in front of the class. next to our artwork, and everyone in the class could critique our artwork. And that doesn't mean they were shitting on it or just praising it. Like there was usually a mix of things. Not everyone's going to be right, what they're saying. Um, but the thing you learn through that is that if you start hearing the same thing through multiple people, then that's
Hmm.
probably an actual problem with it. And we had to stand there and listen to these critiques, and we weren't allowed to say anything. We weren't allowed to defend it. We had to just listen. And that
Wow.
was tough. It's really tough, right? Because you want to defend it, you want to explain what you're doing, and a lot of times that's to your own detriment, right? Like it's better to just sort of take it in, process it, and put it out. And even now, like I mentioned earlier that my wife and I got into photography over the last year, and I some of the stuff I shoot is like artsy, and I go to there's a local art gallery that they have like pro photographers who come in once a month, and they do reviews. So you can bring in
Critiques.
your
Yeah.
yeah. So you bring in your stuff, and they do the same thing. They'll critique. They'll give feedback on your print,
Yeah. Huh.
your photography. So I'm still exposing it to me like in a different
Yeah. Yeah.
discipline,
Yeah.
but I'm exposing myself to that, and and part of it is to remind myself how tough that is because I want to say like they're like oh the image here is like a little bit dim. And I'm like, oh, it was a cloudy day. You want to make excuses, but it doesn't work
Yeah.
because nobody's gonna read a story and give a crap that
Yeah.
I don't know, like that your dog died in the middle of reading it. That's a
I
terrible
see what you're saying.
example,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't. They don't care what you were going through while you did it, and that's why it's not up to snuff, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's a really good process
Unbelievable.
to go through. So if you can find like a local group that are and I think almost every community has people who are aspiring creators. If you can find a good group of people who could sit around and you can critique each
Yeah.
other's work, I think it's very helpful. And especially like if you have people who are good at it, who are great at like telling you what's working and what's not. Like it's not just a what's not working. Anyway, but that's it. Start small. Find a group that is honest and willing to sort of give you feedback, like good feedback.
That is some sound advice, Ed. Thank you for sharing all of that. That was great. Ladies and gents, this is the Shortbox Podcast, and we just finished talking with Ed Brisson about the SilverHawks, which comes back with a brand new comic series starting with issue 1 on January 29th. Go pick that up from your local comic shop or anywhere else you get your comics. And give Ed a follow on your social media platform of choice. I'll have links to his Instagram and X account in the show notes as well as website. He's a good follow, so check him out. And I'll have some additional links in the show notes to some of the other stuff we talked about today. So check those out too. Look, the show notes is your source for all of this stuff. So check out the show notes. Ed, I just want to say thank you for your time. This was a fantastic conversation.
Oh, thanks for
Uh,
having me.
do you got any parting words or shameless plugs before we wrap up and call it a day?
No, I think just please go order Silverhawks, go order Thundercats Lost.
There we go.
At the time that we are talking, it was just announced that Diamond has gone into like bankruptcy protection, which is
Yeah,
like a little bit scary for everyone in the industry.
I
And I
bet.
think now more than just about ever,
Hmm.
comic stores are going to rely on you coming in and telling them
Well said.
what you want in advance. So not just for obviously Thundercats Lost, Silverhawks, top of your list. But anything else you want,
There we go.
make sure to let your store know.
Damn
Uh,
right. Support your local comic shop.
that's it. That's all I got. Just support your comic shop. Let them know what you're after, because it's going to be some weird times ahead.
Well said. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.